Steve Harvey has been rendered speechless on the Family Feud stage more times than he can count. A contestant gives an outrageous answer and his jaw drops. Somebody says something so ridiculous that Steve cannot form words. Those moments are funny. Those moments are the reason millions of people tune in every single day. But on a Wednesday afternoon in June 2025, Steve Harvey was rendered speechless for a completely different reason. Because a wife standing at the podium with her family behind her revealed a secret about a DNA test involving their youngest child. A secret she had been carrying for 4 years. A secret that was not what anyone expected, not even close. When the truth came out, Steve Harvey opened his mouth to respond and nothing came out. No joke, no wisdom, no words at all. He just stood there, his hand pressed against his chest, tears rolling down his face, unable to speak. Because what this woman revealed was not a betrayal. It was a sacrifice so enormous that it defied everything the audience thought they were about to hear. Now I know what you are thinking. You read the title. You think you know where this story goes. You are wrong. This story is going to blindside you the way it blindsided every person in that studio. If you are not subscribed to this channel, hit that button right now and turn on the notification bell. Because I promise you, the twist in this story will change the way you think about what it means to love a child. Let me tell you what happened. The Hudson family from Jacksonville, Florida walked onto the Family Feud stage looking like any other family ready to play. They had their matching gray shirts with Team Hudson printed across the front. They had their coordinated wave. They had the energy of a family that was happy to be there. But 34-year-old Crystal Hudson was carrying something that nobody on that stage, not even her husband, knew the full truth about. A secret she had kept locked in her heart for 4 years. A secret about their youngest child, 4-year-old Ileana, who was too young to be on the show, but whose photograph Crystal kept in her pocket like a talisman. To understand this story, you need to understand Crystal. She was a labor and delivery nurse at Baptist Medical Center in Jacksonville. For 11 years, she had helped women bring their children into the world. She had held the hands of first-time mothers who were terrified. She had coached women through 36-hour labors. She had been the first person to hold newborns who entered the world screaming and perfect. She had also been the nurse in the room on the nights when things did not go perfectly, when complications arose, when decisions had to be made. When the line between life and everything else became thin enough to see through, Crystal knew the full spectrum of what it meant to bring a child into the world, and that knowledge had shaped every decision she had made in her own life. Crystal and her husband, 36-year-old Andre Hudson, had been married for 12 years. Andre was a high school athletic director and head football coach at a public school in Jacksonville. He was the kind of man who gave everything to the people in his care. His players respected him. Their parents trusted him. He spent his evenings reviewing game film, his weekends running practice, and his summers organizing conditioning camps for kids who could not afford the private ones. Andre Hudson was, by every measure, a good man, a devoted husband, and an extraordinary father. They had 3 children together. There was Andre Jr., who everyone called AJ, 11 years old, a 6th grader who had inherited his father's athletic ability and his mother's empathy. Then there was Kendall, 8, a 3rd grader who was obsessed with space and who had declared at the age of 6 that she was going to be an astronaut. And then there was Ileana, 4 years old, the baby of the family, the child with the big brown eyes and the laugh that made everyone in the room laugh with her. The child Crystal kept a photograph of in her pocket, the child at the center of the secret. 4 years ago, Crystal and Andre had been trying for a 3rd child. They had been trying for 2 years. Crystal had suffered 2 miscarriages during that time, both devastating, both followed by months of grief and recovery. The desire for another child had become an ache that lived in their home like a 3rd presence. Andre wanted it as badly as Crystal did. They had talked about it endlessly. They had prayed about it. They had seen specialists. And when nothing worked, Crystal had begun to accept that their family might be complete at 4. Then Crystal's younger sister, Danielle, came to her with something that would change everything. Danielle was 28 at the time, single, and 7 months pregnant. The pregnancy had been unplanned. The father was not in the picture. Danielle was working part-time as a waitress and living in a studio apartment that was barely big enough for 1 person, let alone a newborn. She was overwhelmed, terrified, and running out of time to make a decision about her future and her child's future. Danielle asked Crystal if she and Andre would adopt the baby. She did not ask casually. She asked through tears in Crystal's kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, after weeks of agonizing over the decision. She said she loved her baby. She said she wanted her baby to have the life she could not currently provide. She said she trusted Crystal and Andre more than anyone in the world to give that life. And she asked them to take her child and raise her as their own. Crystal said yes. Andre said yes. They said yes with their whole hearts, without hesitation, without reservation. They hired an attorney. They began the legal adoption process. 2 months later, Danielle gave birth to a baby girl. Crystal was in the delivery room. She was the first person to hold the baby. She cut the cord. She was there for the first breath, the first cry, the first moment of life outside the womb. They named her Ileana, which means my God has answered. Because for Crystal and Andre, after 2 miscarriages and 2 years of heartbreak, this child was exactly that, an answer. The adoption was finalized when Ileana was 3 months old. Crystal and Andre were her legal parents. They were her real parents. They had been her parents from the first second she drew breath. But here was the part that Crystal had kept secret, not from Andre, not from the courts, not from anyone involved in the adoption. She had kept it from the world. She had kept the adoption private. Outside of immediate family, almost nobody knew that Ileana was not Crystal's biological child. Not the neighbors, not Andre's coaching staff, not the parents at AJ and Kendall's school. Crystal had been protective of Ileana's story because she did not want her daughter to grow up being treated differently. She did not want anyone looking at Ileana and seeing an asterisk. The DNA test had come about innocently. 6 months before the taping, AJ had done a genetics project for school that involved a simple at-home DNA ancestry kit. He had been fascinated by the results and had asked if the whole family could do one. Crystal had frozen. She had stalled. She had tried to redirect, but Andre, who did not see any issue, had agreed enthusiastically. Kits were ordered for everyone. When the results came back, there was no avoiding it. Ileana's results did not match Crystal or Andre's genetic profiles. AJ at 11 was too young to understand the full implications, but he had asked questions. Andre had noticed the discrepancy but had assumed it was a testing error. He had mentioned it to Crystal casually. And Crystal, who had been protecting this secret for 4 years, had told him she would look into it. She never did. She let it sit, because the conversation she needed to have was one she had been dreading since the day Ileana was born. The thing Crystal had never told Andre, the secret within the secret, was this. Danielle had not just asked Crystal to adopt Ileana. Danielle had asked Crystal to let Ileana believe that Crystal was her biological mother. Danielle's reasoning was rooted in love and fear. She was afraid that if Ileana knew she had been given up, she would feel abandoned. She was afraid that the knowledge would define Ileana's life in ways that would overshadow everything else. And Crystal, the labor and delivery nurse who had seen the complexity of motherhood from every possible angle, had agreed. She had agreed because she loved her sister. She had agreed because she loved Ileana. And she had agreed because she believed that the identity of who carried a child for 9 months mattered less than the identity of who raised that child for a lifetime. The game started with the Hudsons facing the Perkins family from Atlanta. The first 2 rounds were lively and competitive. Andre was a natural on camera, bringing the same commanding energy he used on the football field. Crystal played well, though there was a tension behind her eyes that the cameras caught in fleeting moments. AJ and Kendall were having a blast. The family was winning. Everything was going well. The 3rd round question arrived. Steve read from his card with his trademark grin. Name a secret that could tear a family apart. The question hit Crystal like a physical force. She was at the podium for the face-off. She hit the buzzer first. Steve turned to her. All right, Crystal, name a secret that could tear a family apart. Crystal looked at the board, then she looked at Steve. Then she turned and looked at Andre, her husband of 12 years, the father of her children, the man who had said yes to adopting Ileana without a second of hesitation, the man who did not know the full truth about why she had protected this secret so fiercely. Crystal turned back to Steve. Her eyes were filling. Her chin was trembling, and in a voice that was barely above a whisper but that every microphone in the studio captured with perfect clarity, she said, "A DNA test. Because our daughter Ileana is not biologically ours. She is my sister Danielle's child, and I have been keeping the full truth about it from my husband for 4 years." Steve Harvey went silent, completely, totally silent. His hand moved to his chest. His mouth opened but no sound came out. His eyes locked onto Crystal with an expression that was not shock in the usual game show sense. It was something deeper. Something that recognized the gravity of what had just been said and was processing it in real time. Steve Harvey, who always had something to say, had nothing, not a word, not a sound. Andre stepped out of the family line. His face was a map of confusion, pain, and something that was not quite anger but was close to it. "Crystal, what are you saying? I know Ileana is adopted. I was there. I signed the papers. What do you mean you have been keeping the truth from me?" Crystal was crying now, but she held herself together long enough to explain. "You know Ileana is Danielle's biological child. You know we adopted her. But what you do not know is that Danielle asked me to never tell Ileana where she came from. She asked me to let Ileana believe I am her biological mother, and I agreed. And when AJ's DNA test came back and you asked about the results, I lied. I told you I would look into it. I never did. Because I was terrified that if we opened that door, everything we had built around Ileana's identity would collapse. I was not hiding the adoption. I was hiding the promise I made to my sister about how Ileana would grow up understanding who she is. The studio processed this revelation in waves. First, the realization that this was not a paternity scandal. Crystal had not been unfaithful. Ileana was not the product of an affair. The audience recalibrated in real time, their initial assumptions dissolving and being replaced by something far more complicated. This was a story about a promise between two sisters, a promise made in love, a promise that had become a secret, and a secret that was now out. Andre stood in the middle of the stage, processing. The confusion on his face was slowly giving way to understanding. He was a coach. He was trained to assess situations quickly and respond appropriately. But this was not a football play. This was his family, his wife, his daughter. Crystal, I need to understand this. You made a promise to Danielle that Ileana would never know she was adopted. Crystal nodded. Why did you not tell me about the promise? Crystal's answer was raw. Because I was afraid you would say we needed to tell Ileana the truth, and I was afraid that if we told her, she would feel like she did not belong, like she was different from AJ and Kendall, like she was less ours. Andre shook his head, not in anger, in the particular kind of heartbreak that comes from understanding someone's reasoning and wishing they had trusted you enough to share it. Crystal, Ileana is my daughter. DNA does not change that. A DNA test does not change that. Nothing changes that. But you carried this alone for 4 years. You did not have to carry it alone. AJ, the 11-year-old, spoke up. He had been quiet through the entire revelation, his young mind processing information that was far beyond what most 6th graders encounter. Mom, is that why the DNA test was different? Is that why Ileana's results did not match? Crystal nodded, fresh tears falling. AJ was quiet for a moment, then said, She is still my sister though, right? She is still Ileana. Crystal grabbed him. Yes, baby, she is still your sister. She will always be your sister. Nothing changes that. Kendall, the 8-year-old future astronaut, tugged on Andre's sleeve. Daddy, I do not understand. Is Ileana not our family anymore? Andre knelt down and looked his daughter in the eyes. Ileana is our family forever, Kendall. She was our family the day she was born. She will be our family every single day for the rest of our lives. No test changes that. No secret changes that. She is ours, period. Kendall thought about this for a moment and said, Good, because she is my best friend. The simplicity and certainty of an 8-year-old's love cut through every complication in the room. Steve Harvey finally found his voice. His eyes were red. His hand was still on his chest. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I have been standing on this stage for a very long time. I have heard people reveal affairs. I have heard people confess to lies and secrets and things they are ashamed of. But what I just heard is none of those things. What I just heard is a woman who loves her daughter so much that she made a promise to protect her identity. She made a promise to her sister, who loved that child enough to give her to someone who could give her a better life. And she carried that promise alone for 4 years because she was terrified that the truth would make her daughter feel like she did not belong. He paused. That is not a betrayal. That is a mother. Mother who would carry any weight, bear any secret, endure any fear to make sure her child feels loved and whole and safe. Crystal, what you did was not perfect. You should have told your husband. You should have trusted him with it. But the reason you did it, the love behind it, that is the purest thing I have witnessed on this stage. The standing ovation was unlike any that had come before it. It was not born from outrage or justice or the satisfaction of watching someone be held accountable. It was born from recognition, from the understanding that love sometimes makes people do imperfect things for perfect reasons. People stood and clapped and cried and held onto the people next to them because what they had just witnessed was the messy, complicated, agonizing reality of what it means to protect a child. Steve announced that the game would continue. The family pulled together. Crystal wiped her eyes and stepped back to the line. Andre stood beside her and in a gesture that said more than any speech, took her hand and held it. They played the remaining rounds as a unit. They won. Crystal and Andre played fast money together, husband and wife, the woman who had carried the secret and the man who was now carrying it with her. They scored 176 points and won $20,000. When the total was revealed, Andre pulled Crystal into a hug and said, quietly but clearly enough for the microphones, We are going to figure this out together. No more carrying it alone. Crystal nodded against his chest and said, I am sorry. Andre said, I know, it is okay, we are okay. Steve made an announcement. His foundation would provide a $10,000 grant to support the family through the counseling process that lay ahead, including family therapy, individual sessions for Crystal, and when the time was right, age-appropriate support for Ileana as she grew older and the conversations about her origin became necessary. Steve also connected the family with an adoption support organization that specialized in helping families navigate identity conversations with adopted children. Crystal, the day is going to come when Ileana asks questions, and when that day comes, you and Andre are going to be ready, because the love in this family is not in question. The only question is how to tell the story. And that story, the story of a sister who loved her child enough to give her the best life possible and a couple who loved that child enough to make her their own, that is a beautiful story. Do not be afraid of it. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the reaction was unlike anything the show had produced that season. The clip went viral, reaching over 82 million views across platforms in the first week. But the conversation it generated was far more complex than the typical viral moment. This was not a simple story of right and wrong. It was a story about the ethics of adoption secrets, the complicated promises people make to protect children, and the question of when and how adopted children should learn their origin stories. Parenting experts debated it. Adoption advocacy groups discussed it. Psychologists analyzed it. The conversation extended far beyond entertainment into a genuine national discussion about identity, belonging, and the definition of family. The hashtag #StillOurs trended globally for 5 days. Adoptive parents used it to share their own stories, their own fears, their own decisions about when and how to tell their children. Birth parents shared their side, the agonizing choice to place a child with someone else and the hope that the decision would be understood someday. Adult adoptees shared their experiences of learning the truth, some at young ages, some as adults, and the range of emotions that came with it. The conversation was not unanimous. Some people supported Crystal's decision to keep the promise. Others argued that Ileana had a right to know from the beginning. The debate was respectful, nuanced, and deeply personal for millions of viewers. Danielle appeared in a follow-up interview that was filmed separately and aired alongside the main episode update. She was composed and thoughtful. She explained her reasoning for asking Crystal to keep the promise. "I was 28, alone and terrified. I loved my baby. I loved her so much that I gave her to the 2 people I trusted most in the world. And I asked Crystal to let Ileana grow up feeling like she completely belonged, without any asterisk, without any explanation, without any difference between her and AJ and Kendall. I know people will disagree with that decision. I understand that. But I made it from a place of love. Every part of it was love." The family entered counseling together. The therapist helped Crystal and Andre develop a plan for telling Ileana her story in an age-appropriate way when she was old enough to process it. The therapist's guidance was clear. The secret should not last forever. Ileana deserved to know her story, but the timing and the framing mattered enormously. The therapist helped Crystal understand that telling Ileana the truth was not a threat to their bond. It was a deepening of it, because the truth was not that Ileana was less theirs. The truth was that 2 women loved her enough to make extraordinary decisions for her. That was not an asterisk. That was a superpower. Crystal and Andre's marriage grew stronger. The secret had been a wall between them that Crystal had not fully recognized until it was gone. Without it, they communicated more openly about everything, not just Ileana, but their own needs, their own fears, and the future they were building together. Andre told a friend that the Family Feud experience had taught him something important. "My wife tried to carry something huge by herself because she was afraid I could not handle it. I need to be the kind of man she is not afraid to tell things to. That is on me as much as it is on her." Danielle became more present in Ileana's life, not as a distant aunt, but as a close, active, involved part of the family. She moved to Jacksonville to be near her daughter. She saw Ileana every week. She was building a relationship that would one day include the full truth, told in the right way at the right time. In the meantime, Ileana had 2 mothers who loved her, a father who adored her, 2 siblings who considered her their best friend, and a family that had decided, publicly and permanently, that DNA was not what made them a family. Love was. Steve closed the follow-up segment 6 months later with words that captured the essence of the entire story. "I have been doing this a long time. I have seen families torn apart by secrets. Secrets about money, secrets about affairs, secrets that were kept for selfish reasons. But this was a secret kept for one reason, to protect a child. A mother made a promise to her sister to let their daughter feel like she completely, unquestionably belonged. Was it the right decision? I do not know. That is not for me to judge. But I will tell you this. The love behind that decision is the realest thing I have ever seen on this stage. And the family that came out of it, the mother, the father, the sister, the children, all of them choosing each other, all of them saying this child is ours. That is what family means. Family is not a DNA test. Family is a choice. And the Hudsons chose each other. That is all that matters. If this story touched you in a way you did not expect, I need you to do something. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that family is not defined by blood. Share it with every adoptive parent, every birth parent, every child who was chosen and loved and wanted. Share it and tell them what Steve told the Hudsons. Family is not a DNA test. Family is a choice. And the choice to love someone, to raise them, to protect them, to stand on a stage and say they are yours, that is the strongest bond in the world. No test can break it. No secret can undo it. Because the love was real from the very first breath. I will see you in the next one.